Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoneman and I'm my host on this program. And we're going to pick up part 2 of a nice discussion we're having with Laurie Ortolano regarding what's going on with the city of Nashua and right-to-know requests. This is important to you because you do have a right to know what's going on with your government, whether it's the local level or state or federal level. You have a right to know, and I hope you would tune in and listen. And so once again, I'm here with Laurie Ortolano. We're going to do part 2, picking up a conversation about some of the investigative work she's been doing and the stonewalling that she's been faced with from the city of Nashua on getting information that she needs and that we all need and have a right to. Laurie, thanks for coming in. We're here in part 2. Let's pick it up from where we left off. It seems like the Attorney General's office is protecting Nashua. Is it because they just can't do it, or they are actually working on behalf of the city to further frustrate you?
I lost a lot of hope in what I see, really, with the agencies, because they leave us to fight on our own, and it's just so difficult. And
we hear about what goes on in Washington all the time. There's a lot of talk about the weaponization of these various... We're fine, we're continuing.
Okay, good.
A lot of talk about the weaponization of the various branches, not branches necessarily, but the departments. So
Right.
the DOJ and the FBI and all these things, they're weaponized. The left is weaponizing these entities against conservatives, it seems.
Right.
And here it is right here in New Hampshire and right here in Nashua, too, where the city of Nashua seems to be weaponizing, and the state maybe is aiding and abetting them in that against citizens.
I think that's true. And you know what's happened in Nashua? I think our government has just become very powerful, because when they've been challenged in court in the past, maybe in the last 10 years, the courts were very lenient toward the city.
Yeah, they appear to be very sympathetic.
Very sympathetic. And
in the pocket, almost.
Yeah, and it's concerning because it gave a lot of, Mayor Donchis has been around 8 years. It gave a lot of power to him to operate whatever way he wanted to.
And he's been heard to say, let's see what we get away with.
Totally think that's true, and he operates that way.
Yeah,
and
that's how he operates.
The recent AG order that came out for the cease and desist, Laura Calhoun submitted that. Did you see that?
I did, but tell us about it.
Okay, so that went up to the AG's office, and that was good old Laura. She was so frustrated at what they had done, what the mayor had done to use the public TV station to pitch a political position on changing the police commission appointments. And she really felt it was wrong, and she said, I'm going to put this up at the AG's office. I reviewed it for her. She did a good job. And she submitted it maybe in September, October of 2022. Well, it took until January of 2024 to get an answer. So that's another thing. It takes a long time. But they did come out and determine that the mayor had violated the state statute. And it's a criminal penalty, a misdemeanor,
right.
But it doesn't hold because more than a year has gone by. So it ends up being more or less a slap on the wrist. But they did find he had violated that RSA, and they issued an order, a cease and desist order, to not use the public television station equipment is essentially what is prohibited. And they found that 3 of the aldermen also violated it because they went on after the mayor went on to try and counter what the mayor had done. When he came and decided to run that PSA, 4 or 5 days before the election, he didn't tell the board he was doing that. And, the problem is his board's position on that police commission charter change was against it. And he was leading initiative to do a ballot deal, which he got all the signatures to do it, and then campaign on it. So the policies of the station, when I looked at the policy book for, like CTV and the board, was that you can only use the station to pitch what the legislative body has approved. It has to be what the full body approved. So this was definitely outside the scope.
Right. And he probably knew that.
He's an attorney.
Yeah.
Come on.
So he knew it, bending the rules, trying to see what he can get away with.
Ran it 26
misusing
times.
Public
right.
Funds and public access television.
And then he came out and said, when the order came out and the newspaper interviewed him, he said, my First Amendment rights are being violated. which is amazing to me given what's going on in here in Nashua when it comes to First Amendment rights for us citizens.
Right.
And,
He actually claimed that? He claimed his First Amendment rights?
that they were
Really?
stepping on his First Amendment rights, and that he felt it was in violation. And what he was conducting was a debate. And debates are permitted on television stations. Well, Mr. Mayor, a debate does not involve me, myself, and I.
Right.
You know, it takes two to have a debate.
Right.
And should we trust you when you go on TV to make certain you're pitching the other side properly?
You know, we hear, well, you're right, and it isn't a balanced debate.
No, it was. You know, the arguments were laughable, and also very telling that leadership isn't willing to take responsibility. Now, I will say this: the Board of Aldermen, the 3 aldermen that were also issued a cease and desist order, they didn't comment. You know, they
Sure.
didn't.
They just obeyed.
They obeyed. They
Yeah.
took it for what it was and left it alone.
Yeah.
That was the appropriate response.
Yeah.
Really. And the mayor should have just said, you know what, I've been told, I've been informed, accept responsibility.
Yeah.
This won't happen again.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And show that you're able to correct a mistake and move on. What I find this administration just does not correct mistakes.
And one of the things that I think is good for Nashua, a feather in our cap periodically, is we come out listed somewhere in Money or Forbes or whatever as one of the best cities to live in the city and in the country. And those are all good awards. It's nice to think that we live in a city that makes it to a list like that. But I think the folks that are doing those lists don't pay attention to what the mayor's doing in this case, or
Right.
what happening with citizens' right-to-know petitions,
Right.
and how much obfuscation there is
Right.
happening in City Hall against the citizenry, and it's wrong. So some of those reviews that say we're doing so well, I like seeing those,
Right.
but they're not truthful either.
No, because
There's stuff going on that shouldn't be going on.
the big one that keeps coming out with high ratings for us is Wallet Hub. You hear that all the time, Wallet Hub. And when you look at the cities they take to compare us to, it's like Los Angeles and Detroit. And
Right.
the sample of cities that are taken in that survey
Yeah.
do not fit with Nashua.
Yeah.
We're different. And so, and I swear I start to wonder whether you get bought into these things. Somehow
It's a scam.
somebody,
someone
somebody
applies
puts
for
it in.
it. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
somebody puts it in.
It's not truthful.
And all of a sudden you got this nice award that's coming your way. And yeah, I agree with you. It's a positive feel kind of thing. It's good for us to have that, but
It's not based on truth because they're not looking at what's really going on.
what's the reality here?
Yeah.
And how do you make it better? You know, I went to a finance meeting maybe 3 weeks ago, and I addressed the committee in general, saying that we've had a lot of right-to-know issues in Nashua, and I think it would be productive to just form a committee and discuss what we can do between the public and the legislative body, the Board of Aldermen, to improve the situation. You know, Judge Temple wrote orders, you know, kind of admonishing the city for delaying and not responding and violating people's rights. And he strongly suggested in June of 2023 that the city produce a policy, put it on the website, develop some consistency, and make it work. And I was in another hearing where Attorney Leonard was speaking to Judge Colburn because she was asking, what is the city's policies? I think this was in May. You know, what are your practices? What are you working on? What are you improving? And Attorney Leonard was making all of these flowery statements about how hard they're working and they're going to do all this stuff. It was frankly frustrating for me to hear that because it had no truth to it in my book. But fast forward, and here we are, you know, 8 months later, and there appears to be nothing done. And what I said to the Finance Committee is, you know, the town of Hudson and the town of Milford were faced with right-to-know lawsuits, both those towns, from citizens that were frustrated with how their government responded. In Hudson, they had that Amazon logistics plant going in that nice neighborhood in South Hudson. And those folks felt like they were ambushed. It wasn't publicized properly. They ended up taking the developer, Hillwood, to court along with the city. The citizens didn't do well. It's hard to do well against a big developer. The city or the town of Hudson did not win on their motion for summary judgment either. And because of that kind of conflict, several of the selectmen said, let's get a committee going. Let's get some of these citizens on the committee. Let's talk about how to make our process for handling these better, and collaborate and compromise and get a little better communication going between the city employees and the citizens. And these selectmen, I thought, were really reasonable because they understood the frustration of the citizen, but they also understood the balance of the employee and the worker who's filling these requests. I thought it was very balanced. They produced a new policy. It took about 7-8 months. They adopted it in December, I think, or the fall of 2023. Fast forward, and also Milford had a lady who took him to court on some right-to-know issues. She ended up really not winning, getting a lot of moot rulings. It wasn't a victory for her, but she ended up taking a few pieces to the ombudsman and doing okay and getting some rulings. So the town could see that there was some merit. They could also see that they were making mistakes in how they were handling right-to-knows. They formed a committee. They worked on a policy. They piggybacked off of Hudson. They adopted a new procedure, and they wanted to tell their public, we're going to be more mindful of this. Nashua, for all the cases we've had going, and citizens have won, hard fought, but we've won.
Yeah.
They have not been willing to do anything public.
No, they just dig their heels in even deeper.
And I said to the finance committee, I don't know what you've done to improve right to know, because the leaders of the city never come to the legislative body to have a talk to say, hey, we want to let you, Board of Aldermen, know what we're changing, what we're doing, because that would be done in a public meeting, and I would be able to hear that. But they don't do that. Not once have they done that on all of the stuff that's gone on the last 2.5 years. It's been zip. So I said, it's a shame that the only way I can figure out what you've done to improve the process that the court has encouraged you to do is to file a right-to-know request to ask. I said, that seems so futile.
Yeah,
And
it's silly, right? You have to file a right-to-know to find out, is there a right-to-know policy?
So I got my 3 minutes. That was my 3-minute talk. I turn around to go back to the chamber bench. I'm not even seated, and the mayor is firing off. I just want to let you know that most of what she said isn't true, and her last 5 cases have all been dismissed, and she hasn't done well at all. It was just a trash talk piece. And then an alderman, Melbourne Moran, dove in to say, town of Hudson is a mess, and they had a problem with the right to know through the police department, and they're a terrible example. So he starts disparaging the town of Hudson. It was a disaster. I mean, I sat down and I thought, you got to be kidding me. This is how resistant you are to working with us to identify that you ought to change some things and make it be known to the public what's going on.
And the Board of Aldermen is complicit in this.
Totally. Because they don't follow their code of conduct.
No.
And they are attacking citizens very freely.
Where does this kind of stuff come from? I think it's leadership from the top.
It is.
The attitude is set at the top.
Yes.
And once the mayor makes it clear that he's going to do whatever he can get away with, the Board of Aldermen says, well, if he's going to do it, we're going to do it. And the attorney's office does it. The various offices within City Hall do it. In some cases, they're probably instructed by the executives to behave a certain way. But it's a tone that is set. And if we had a different tone, I think the rest of the city, all those departments would follow.
I agree. I mean, it's the mayor, it's the corporation council, it's the director of administrative services now. That trifecta is working very effectively.
Who's the director of administrative services?
Kim Cummings. He moved from economic development, and he took over Kim Kleiner's job.
And he was also admonished in that letter, specifically by name.
Yes.
For withholding, for getting personal satisfaction out of causing you
just a lot of
hardship.
anguish and having to go to court to figure out.
Yes, and he was personally admonished by name.
Right.
And I think that speaks very poorly of the city of Nashua and very poorly of leadership within the city of Nashua.
And I will tell you, since that admonishment, he has not moved the needle a degree to change. Now, Laura Calhoun takes the city to court on January 22nd. She files a right to know lawsuit with 8 claims. And it was not my doing at all. You know, I didn't want to see her go in because I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
And I know how personally attacking it is. And she's, a 75-year-old woman who, looks like a strong wind might knock her down. So, but she was frustrated, and she felt she had been treated so horribly, and she had. I mean, I feel very badly for her because I think behind the scenes, all her knowledge of financing, the fact that that woman can read a trial balance and a general ledger and peel through financials the way she can, she's amazing. But they look at her like she's some dingbat old lady who doesn't need any respect. Yeah. She got so frustrated, she wrote this lawsuit up. And she did a pretty good job. She wrote it very differently from mine, but she did a good job. And then it took 5 months to get to court. That's okay, that's better than mine, with 8 claims. So she goes to court, and the city brings in, there's 3 lawyers on their side, right? And it was so hard for her. She wrote her testimony out. She did everything in writing because she's not a good public speaker. And she said, I'm not like you. I can't just stand up there and speak and go off the top of my head. I need to have something written. She spends weeks writing her testimony. When she got to court, the judge kind of was like, well, you have to go off your memory. You can't use your written testimony. You could, but what is that? Is that like an opening statement? Laura couldn't figure out what the judge was asking her because she's a pro se litigant. And actually, at one point, the judge said, are you here to do offers of proof, or are you giving sworn testimony? That was an interesting question because even for me, having gone to court, I didn't know the difference. I didn't know what an offer of proof was relative to sworn testimony. So she decided, the judge, I think, that she would swear her in, because Laura said, well, I am giving my own testimony. I'm giving my own account here. And she said, what I wrote up is all my exhibits. But she pushed aside what she wrote up, kind of used it as a guide, and went off of her memory. And she missed some pieces. I mean, it's hard to do. It was 3 hours long. But one of her complaints was against Director Cummings. It was all surrounding his office. And for the Art Center, they were producing financial reports monthly of the spending. And we believed that we should be able to get those reports.
Sure.
And she wrote on May 1st an email to Deb Novotny, who was vice president of the 3 corporations formed to do this deal, to ask for those reports. And Deb Novotny said, write to the city. So on the 2nd of May, she sent it to Tim Cummings. And she named the exact report she wanted, the Consulting Services Construction Progress Report. Exact name. And she said, I'll attach a copy from December. Well, she forgot to attach it to her email, but she had the exact name, and she wanted it for the end of April of 2023. On May 8th, Mr. Perrin responds and says, we'll get back to you in like 57 days. We're going to conduct a search and get back to you in 57 days. She was upset. And I agree. That's ridiculous.
If they were having a meeting and wanted to reference that document, they'd find it in 3 seconds.
That's exactly right. So 57 days later, she gets a response from Gary Perrin saying, oh, we'd like you to describe it in more detail and you forgot to attach your document to the May 2nd request.
Oh,
she
my
said,
goodness.
You're waiting 57 days to tell me that? So she writes back. She's all frustrated. I remember the day she called me. And when she writes back to him, she gets an email bounce that says, I'm on vacation until July 17th. Oh. So July 17th, he comes back, and he writes to her and says, we don't have any such document. No record exists. So that ends in July. In August, I get a batch of these emails from the city on these new market tax credits. What's in there? An agreement from the consulting company out of Maine that was doing these reviews of finances. Who signed for the authorized agent to receive those reports? Tim Cummings. In the document, it says the reports are to be delivered, uses the word shall be delivered to, and it lists 4 email addresses. The first email, Tim Cummings. So that was a document that the city was supposed to be receiving for the whole 2.5-year project.
And probably were, but didn't want to share it.
Well, when she put him on the stand in court, he said he never got it. And he never received the document. He didn't have it. Now, his attorney went hard on Laura and said,
Who's his attorney?
a guy named Callahan.
Is he a city employee?
No, he's an attorney from outside. Tim Cummings hired his own lawyer to represent him on this.
Really?
Yeah, which the city is paying for. So in comes a guy out of a firm in Concord, I believe. And he puts Laura on the stand and he goes hard on her. He says, hey, are you accusing my personal lying? Of course, Laura's very blunt. She goes, yes. And so it was great. And so then he says, but you had no proof. You had no 100% proof that Tim Cummings had that report. And what Laura wasn't, aware enough to say to him was that, hey, under the right to know law, I can operate off of, based on a belief, based on information and belief. That's an actual case law example.
Sure, you don't know what's there if no one's willing to be forthcoming with it.
Right, and information and belief is stronger than a hunch or a guess. So it is considered a appropriate legal term to challenge a record. And why would she use information and belief? Because it was a signed contract with his name on it.
Right.
So the thing that amazed me, I watched her say to the judge, it took 75 days to find out they had nothing. And how did they do the search? And when he was on the stand, she said to him, did you call Deb Novotny and ask her about this? Because she knew about the report. He said no. She said, did you call the company to try and get the report? No. So I walked out of there, and that very next day, I wrote a request. And I said, I'm asking you to contact the contractor in Maine, Consulting Services Construction, LLC, and get Commercial, LLC, and get the reports that they were contractually obligated to give us. Who's doing contract compliance in this city?
Nobody.
And Tim Cummings is making $152,000, the second highest paid person in the city, sitting in the second leadership position from the mayor, given a new title of COO, and he's in charge of purchasing, and he sees that the city is not receiving a document that the public should have access to, and he does nothing to do enforcement. No. I just feel like that's crazy.
I wonder if he's gotten those documents, those reports, or not.
Well, you know what? I wrote the request and said, go get them. And then I tried to follow up. They won't tell me. I have to wait a month, 5 weeks. They need 5 weeks to conduct a search. That's what they said to me. What search do you have to conduct? Call the company up in Maine and say, no doubt they're sitting on a guy's computer in a directory, City of Nashua, financial reports. Yep. Boom. Click the directory, send it to the city, and forward it to us.
I got a feeling a consulting company like that in Maine or wherever is probably more tightly run ship than the city of Nashua.
Well,
and they probably have been submitting these reports.
Oh, I think
that would be my guess.
I think they're definitely submitting the reports. And what cracked me up is Laura called the company in Maine and she talked to the president, right? Mm-hmm. She does 2 phone calls and she says, hey, you had an obligation to give us this report. Why didn't you do it? I don't know. Well, you signed a contract. Tim Cummings is to get the report by email. She said, we want the report. So she has those conversations. She leaves a third message. Yesterday, we dial into the company. The phone's been disconnected. It's changed. And so I started laughing. I said, okay, Laura, I guess that's the way it's going to go. Hopefully they're still in business. But they work closely with Muskoma Bank in doing these new market tax credit deals and doing oversight as a private firm. They get paid a lot of money, too. They get paid like, I'm going to say for the life of the project, they probably got paid $25,000 to produce these financial statements for us.
Maybe all they're doing is checking the box for somebody.
It could be, but we did get one report that covered up until December of 2022, and then we did get a report. So finally, in November, end of November of 2023, right before I went to trial, we got another report that was sent to us, I think, by Deb Novotny. But here was Director Cummings on the stand saying, not my responsibility, I didn't search, and now I have a right to know and they're doing the same stonewalling game that they did to Laura.
Yeah. Why did he get an attorney? he got an attorney to protect himself.
He did, and he's had one for a while.
I think he knows it's not a admission of guilt, but it sure looks like it.
Well, you know what? He'll be on the stand when I go back to court in April, and I'm not going to be a bit surprised if his attorney doesn't sign on to my case now. Because there's a lot of credibility issues with this man, I think. Honestly, I am really concerned.
Yeah, he's not been a benefit to the city.
He is a hider of information, and he is a twister of facts, and everything that went down with that art center was a game of deception.
Yeah.
Really, no municipality in this state should engage in that type of financing scheme to do a building.
Right.
It's just not the proper application of that federal program, and it's really not proper for public money and public record access to run something that way.
Yeah, I hope that the feds or somebody somewhere steps up and says, you know what, this is not done properly.
No.
And looks into it.
Well,
but so far, you don't get help out of the AG's office. You don't get help anywhere.
Well, it's interesting because the court issued an order on December 20th. I had a separate suit against the for-profit company where I believed a lot of our records were. I filed a separate lawsuit, Right to Know. And it went to a hearing in September 11th, on the McLean Middleton, who's representing the corporations, filed a motion to, the MPAC Corporation, the for-profit corporation, filed a motion to dismiss. We had a hearing on September 11th. And I actually pushed the court to just get the order out, kind of after my trial in December, so that it wasn't just hanging there. I wanted to know where we stood. The court granted the McLean's dismissal, and it's a very interesting case on the basis that the legislature changed Right to Know in 2008. The change built in language that said only 501c3s could be considered corporations that might contain public records and non-public records, and that this was a fully for-profit corporation which didn't fit under a 501c3, and therefore the records couldn't be public. I don't think that the court interpreted the law correctly, but the court wrote a very interesting, half-page footnote on that order. And it did say that Mrs. Ortolano's concerns regarding the public nature of that entity in the records is not without merit. I always find it interesting. Courts always write sentences in the negative.
Yeah.
They don't really say she had merit. It's just that it wasn't without merit.
Yeah.
And, basically said that constitutionally under Part 2, Article 5 of the Constitution does not permit a municipality or a town from owning the shares or an interest or giving a loan or benefiting from a for-profit corporation. And that nobody has briefed this issue as of this point, so the court isn't going to weigh in on it, but that's being looked at right now because I really think it was never constitutional.
Probably not, but the MO is let's see what we get away with. Laurie, we've been here a long time. I think we're run out of time. Yeah. But thank you very much for coming in. I sure hope something happens, especially with the Art Center, because the document you wrote, it's appalling. It's chilling. Yeah. To see the level of obfuscation and cheating or lying, whatever it is, however you want to phrase it, that's went into that project. It's really terrible, and I think that it should come to light, and the citizens of Nashua should get some satisfaction from the city or from somebody who has voiced this deception on the public. Right. So thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to thank you folks for tuning in. I'm here with Laurie Ortolano. My name is David Schoneman. You're watching Perspectives. Thanks very much for tuning in. And if you have any questions or comments, please send us an email. We'd be glad to hear from you. We'll see you next time.